In 2012, archaeologists did the impossible. They found the remains of King Richard III buried beneath a parking lot in Leicester, England. In 2014, DNA tests confirmed it was him. The world celebrated. But there was a problem. A second DNA test examining the male Y chromosome failed completely. It was a total mismatch, pointing to a massive royal scandal. The scientists presented it as an unsolved mystery and quietly moved on. New findings in 2025 have blown that mystery wide open, revealing the original discovery was even more disturbing than anyone dared to admit. The truth isn't just infidelity, it's a lie that defined centuries of royal power and invalidated an entire dynasty's claim to the throne. For 527 years, King Richard III lay beneath what would become a parking lot. He was the last English king to die in battle, struck down at Bosworth Field in 1485, marking the end of the brutal Wars of the Roses. His victorious enemies, the Tudors, paraded his naked body through the streets of Leicester, slung over a horse, the ultimate humiliation. After a hasty burial at Greyfriars Church, history moved on. During the Reformation, the church was torn down, paved over, and the exact location of his grave was lost. For centuries, he was remembered mostly as the monstrous villain in Shakespeare's play, a hunchbacked murderer. That changed in 2012 when screenwriter Philippa Langley, convinced the historical accounts were Tudor propaganda, persuaded the University of Leicester to dig beneath a city council parking lot. Everyone thought she was crazy. On the very first day, they found human leg bones. The skeleton belonged to a man in his early 30s. Richard was 32 when he died. The grave was crudely dug and too short, forcing the head into an awkward position. This wasn't a royal burial, it was the work of enemies. The skeleton was riddled with 10 injuries, 8 to the skull. 2 head wounds were instantly fatal, one from a sword to the base of the skull, another from a halberd that punctured straight through the top of his head. This was a king surrounded, unhorsed, and finished off in a frenzy. But the real breakthrough was the spine. Severe scoliosis would have made his right shoulder sit noticeably higher than his left. Tudor propaganda had called him a hunchbacked toad, an exaggeration, but rooted in reality. Everything pointed to one conclusion: they had found him. But they needed genetic proof. Getting usable DNA from 500-year-old bones is incredibly difficult. Dr. Turi King's team worked in sterile conditions, drilling into the king's tooth and leg bone to extract genetic material. They needed a living relative. Here's the science. Mitochondrial DNA passes only from mother to child, unchanged through generations. Richard had no surviving children, but he had an older sister, Anne of York. Genealogists traced Anne's female lineage through 17 generations to the present day, finding Michael Ibsen, a Canadian furniture maker in London, and Wendy Duldig, a distant cousin. The team extracted mtDNA from the skeleton and compared it to Michael Ibsen's modern DNA. The results? A perfect match. The specific haplogroup J they shared is quite rare. The odds of coincidence were astronomical. In February 2013, the University of Leicester announced the skeleton was, beyond reasonable doubt, King Richard III. The world celebrated. But then they ran a second test. The Y chromosome passed exclusively from father to son. Richard's Y chromosome should match other men descended from his male line ancestors through King Edward III. The results came back. A total mismatch. They didn't match at all. The king's paternal DNA line was broken. Somewhere in the 19 generations separating Richard from his modern relatives, someone's father wasn't who the history book said. This was hard proof of a hidden royal scandal. But where did the break happen? The Y chromosome mismatch had enormous implications. The Plantagenet king's entire claim to the throne was based on an unbroken father-to-son succession ordained by God. The DNA proved that bloodline was not pure. The 2014 research paper presented 2 possibilities. Possibility 1. The break happened after Richard III, somewhere in the 500-year line of Somerset descendants. This was the safe explanation, a minor noble scandal. Possibility 2. The explosive one. The break happened before Richard III, meaning Richard himself, his brother King Edward IV, or his father, were not the biological sons of their supposed fathers. If true, Richard III had no legitimate blood claim to the throne. His brother Edward IV would also be illegitimate. The entire Wars of the Roses, a brutal 30-year conflict, would have been fought over a complete genetic lie. The 2014 team presented both possibilities equally, concluding they couldn't pinpoint where the break occurred. By being cautious, they softened the blow and buried the lead. This allowed the world to focus on finding the king and treat the Y chromosome mismatch as an unsolvable footnote. The implications were too explosive. It questioned the legitimacy of the entire York and Tudor dynasties. For 10 years, the data sat like a ticking time bomb, waiting for technology to catch up. In 2025, a new team at the University of Leicester, working with geneticists from Harvard and the Max Planck Institute, used cutting-edge technology, long-read sequencing, advanced proteomic analysis, and epigenetic mapping. They needed a control sample. They got permission from Westminster Abbey to sample the tomb of John of Gaunt, Duke of Lancaster, son of King Edward III, who died before the suspected break could have happened. The results were devastating. First, deep analysis proved with 99.9% certainty that the modern Somerset family's Y chromosome line was unbroken back to the 15th century. The break wasn't on their side. Then they tested John of Gaunt. His Y chromosome perfectly matched the modern Somersets. This was the smoking gun. The Somerset line was the true Plantagenet bloodline. Therefore, Richard III's different Y chromosome was the break. The false paternity happened in Richard's immediate family, specifically with his father, Richard, Duke of York. Suddenly, a 500-year-old rumor clicked into place. Not sure is the royal lie exposed. During the Wars of the Roses, enemies claimed Richard, Duke of York, was not the son of the Earl of Cambridge. They said his mother, Cecily Neville, had an affair while her husband was at war. They even named the supposed father, an archer named Blaeborn. At the time, this was dismissed as political propaganda. The 2025 DNA analysis proves that rumor was likely true. Richard, Duke of York, the man who started the Wars of the Roses, was illegitimate. This means his sons, King Edward IV and King Richard III, had no legitimate blood claim to the throne by the standards of their own time. The Wars of the Roses, which killed tens of thousands and tore England apart for 30 years, was fought over a bloodline that didn't exist. The Yorkist kings were imposters by their own rules. The irony is stunning. Richard III seized the throne by declaring his nephews, the princes in the Tower, illegitimate. Now his own DNA reveals his entire family's claim was fraudulent. Edward IV, who ruled for 22 years and was considered one of England's most successful kings, had no legitimate right to the throne. Richard III died at Bosworth Field defending a crown that was never rightfully his. Larger why this matters. For a decade, scientists avoided this truth because it was too disturbing. The implications were so vast that the scientific community let it sit as an unsolved mystery. But DNA doesn't lie. The 2025 study is the uncensored truth, the version they were too afraid to publish before. It proves that Richard, Duke of York, was not the biological son of his supposed father. His mother was pregnant with another man's child. Richard III and Edward IV had no legitimate claim to the throne. The entire dynasty was built on a lie. King Richard III, the skeleton found under a parking lot, was a king with no legitimate claim to his crown by the standards of his own era. His dynasty was built on a genetic fraud. And 540 years after his death, science has finally exposed it. The DNA from a 500-year-old skeleton has rewritten the history of England's bloodiest civil war and exposed the greatest royal fraud of the Middle Ages. The Wars of the Roses wasn't just a fight between noble houses. It was a fight over a lie so fundamental it took 21st century genetics to expose it. What do you think? Does this change how we view medieval monarchy and the Wars of the Roses? Let us know in the comments. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more of history's greatest mysteries revealed by science.